Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
11 years since the 26 November attacks in Mumbai, what has changed? Is India better prepared to deal with such attacks now? Have corrective measures been taken? That's what we're going to look at in Government Matters today with me, Ruhi Tiwari. Snehesh Alex Philip, our in-house defense expert, is in the studio with me today. Snehesh, to begin with, straightforward question.
Okay.
Can an attack like this be prevented now?
Well, Ruhi, that's a very tough question that you're asking me, whether this such an attack can be prevented or not. Well, there are a lot of changes that have taken place as far as the security, the intelligence is concerned. But to say confidently whether whether such an attack can take place, I think nobody even from the security and defense establishment would be saying so.
Sure.
So, yeah.
But if we were to look at it, let me flip the question a little bit. Is India more secure now as compared to what it was then in terms of the kind of measures that have been taken, in terms of the kind of intelligence inputs we get?
No, absolutely. There's no doubt about the fact that India is much more secure than what it was 11 years ago. What happened 11 years ago was a colossal failure as far as the intelligence and the defense preparedness and security is concerned. So over the years, there are a lot of steps that have been taken by the government, by the agencies, both. And when I say agencies, I don't mean just the intelligence agencies, but also the Coast Guard, the Navy. A lot of measures have been taken into account. So yes, we as in the country is much safer from what it was 11 years ago.
So Snehesh, what would you call that? Was that what happened, an intelligence failure? Was it a failure on part of the Navy?
Well, Ruhi, it was a failure across board. It's not just the failure of the Navy. It was a failure of the intelligence agencies. It was a failure of the IB. It was a failure of the RAW. It was a failure of the national security architecture at that point of time, as well as a complete failure of the Navy too. Remember that the Navy, is in charge of the maritime domain. The fact that the terrorists were able to manage to sneak into Mumbai through the seas is a failure on part of the Coast Guard as well as the Navy. The fact that they were able to carry out such an audacious attack, which would have taken months and months of planning, is a failure on part of the intelligence network, especially the RAW, which looks after the external, which focuses a lot on these jihadi groups in Pakistan. It's also a failure on the part of the Intelligence Bureau because, the SIM cards, there were certain things that the Intelligence Bureau had information on it, but they didn't realize that they were sitting on this mine of information. Right. So there was a huge, issue as far as the security and intelligence apparatus is concerned.
So I'll come back. I want to focus a little bit on the Navy, but I'll come back to that in a little while. Just a brief recap of what happened then.
Well, what happened then is that taking advantage of the night, 10 terrorists, heavily armed terrorists and heavily trained terrorists managed to sneak into Mumbai from Karachi. They hijacked a fishing vessel and they entered Mumbai without being challenged, without being noticed. Through the sea route, and they were able to, cause a huge mayhem out there, in which if I'm not mistaken, about 166 civilians, including a lot of foreigners, were killed. It took the Indian defense and security establishment literally 3 days to end this particular siege. The entire Mumbai had come to a complete standstill. I still remember, I flew into Mumbai to cover this particular attack, and from the airport to the particular location, to the Taj Hotel, which usually takes about 2.5 hours, I reached there in about 30 minutes. Yeah, so the entire Mumbai had come to a stand. That's how
paralyzed the city was.
Yeah, that's how paralyzed the city was.
Right.
So yes.
So Snehesh, now coming back to the Navy, I want to focus a little bit on that. What changes have taken place since then? Any corrective measures?
Well, a lot of corrective measures have taken place as far as I'll talk not just about the Navy but also the Coast Guard as well as the maritime forces of the state police. Now, the first thing is that both the Coast Guard and the maritime polices have been equipped with more vessels at their disposal, which means these are fast interceptor vessels that can be used. The surveillance goes on for a much longer scale than before. All of them have been equipped with latest kind of weapons. Right. So as far as equipment is concerned, they have been given all kinds kinds of equipments. At the same time, you also the government has also set up a 24/7 joint operation center, which receives inputs not just from the Navy but the Coast Guard as well as the Maritime Defence Force of the State Police. There's a larger coordination between all of them. Also, the fact that there's a larger and deeper sharing of intelligence, seamlessly, which is happening through the Intelligence Bureau, the RAW, as well as the Navy Intelligence, the Coast Guard, and the State Police. So yes, in terms of equipment, in terms of sharing of information that is there, we should also not forget the fact that the government has also created a new range of radar network along the coastline. So yes, so that's a huge input. Also, along with the fact that a lot of cameras have been set up across various locations. It's still a work in progress despite 11 years. And also is the AI system, which is the automatic identification system. Now, this is a system that is supposed to be installed on every Indian fishing vessel.
Right.
So, you have a domain awareness center, naval center in Gurgaon, and I've been to that center. So, with in that center, you can observe all the vessels which are operating in the Indian waters.
Right.
But it's still a work in progress. There are a large number of vessels which still don't have this particular system.
Sure. Also, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that they will create this position of Chief of Defence Staff, which has been long pending. So, would that also help in better coordination between various armed forces?
Well, the Chief of Defence Staff would help in coordination in the armed forces, but as far as if you're asking in specifically in relation to 2611,
in terms of any potential possible terror attacks.
Well, yes, there would be a coordinated response that would be there. For example, I still remember when the 2611 happened. Remember that the first people to arrive at the scene of I would say action or crime was the Marcos. Now, Marcos are the special commando. They are the commandos of the Indian Navy. Unfortunately, the Marcos, despite their being at the scene early, they were not able to do much because they had zero idea about how to operate in an urban warfare kind of a thing. Then there were columns of the army that was brought in, but again, these are army personnel. These were not the special forces. So that was an issue. Then finally, the NSG had to be brought in. Now, there's a lot of things about the entire operation, in the hindsight. I'm sure the NSG would also agree that the operation could have been carried out in a much better scheme of things. So a CDS would help in coordinating the information as far as the defense forces are concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Snehesh, let's talk a little bit about the terrorist attacks that have happened since 26/11. The latest, of course, that comes to mind is the one in Pulwama, and how they have been different.
Well, it has been different because, for example, in Pulwama, it was a radicalized Kashmiri youth who became a suicide bomber. 2611 cannot be compared to any other terror attack that has happened in the country. 2611 is a watershed moment as far as the India is concerned. Primarily because these were not just regular radicalized people who were coming into who were carrying out an attack. These were 10 hardened, well-trained individuals from Pakistan who managed to break through multiple security layers and reach India. Right. And this particular operation involved months and months of planning. You had the example of David Coleman Headley, who traveled in various parts of India. He took pictures, he made graphs. There was a lot of planning that went into this particular thing. I think the only thing which comes closer, again, is a watershed moment, is actually the Mumbai blast of 1993. Right. At that time, again, also, if you remember, that it was the RDX had come through the sea route. So it was a failure at that time in 1993, and it was a complete failure in 2008 also.
Right. Now, Snehesh, after the 2008 attacks, were people held accountable? What kind of action was taken?
Well, Rui, sadly, no one was really, made accountable to what happened. There was a commission that, went into this particular report. They came out with this whole do's and don'ts and, what's supposed to be done and all. But as far as, responsibility is concerned, people were not held accountable. Eventually, later on, people they retired. For example, at that time, no action was taken against the NSA, which was an absolute failure. No action was taken against the IB director at that time, which was an absolute failure. No action taken against the RAW. No action taken against the Navy or the Coast Guard.
Any of the stakeholders involved.
Any of the stakeholders didn't really face an action where there was no public action that was there to make them accountable for the absolute failure that happened 11 years ago.
Right. Well, one can only hope that India has learned from some of these mistakes and several of the gaps have been plugged since then. Thank you so much for watching Government Matters. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.